All right, welcome back, everyone. This is episode number 4 of the Odyssey podcast. We have a very special guest today. She accepted our request last minute, so thank you very much in advance,
No problem.
Catriona. But this is Catriona Connolly. You might know her as Catriona on Instagram. Catriona is a nutrition student in UCD. She's also a nutrition coach. She's putting out really great content that both myself and Connor and my girlfriend Kate really admire. So we're delighted to have you. You're also a very high level powerlifter. As I said before the show started, you've got a serious powerlifting CV. So why don't you introduce yourself, Catriona?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm third year nutrition student, so I've another year left. Initially I went into this degree with the intention of doing a master's in sports nutrition and work with athletes. So I started coaching last August, I think. So I've only been coaching about 6 months now. But kind of what got me into coaching was, so initially before nutrition, I wanted to go into psychology and I really wanted to be a therapist. And then I actually went to therapy and realized that I hated it and I never wanted to do that. So I moved to nutrition. And so the great thing about my course is that I can pick elective subjects. So I pick 2 electives a year, and I've been doing some electives in health psychology, sports psychology, and eating behaviors. And that kind of got me interested into kind of why we eat and how can we change our eating patterns. Because ultimately, like, it's not just about your willpower, it's not about what you know. There's so much more that goes into it. So then in terms of powerlifting, I started powerlifting in 2018. I was recovering from disordered eating myself, and I started going to the gym to help with that. I did my first comp in July of 2018, and then I think a year later I went to Worlds in Sweden, which is great. It just happened very quickly. Competition seems so far. I'm trying to think back to competition days. They seem so far away. But yeah, so I went to Worlds. I think it was like 12, 11 months after I first started competing, which was a great experience. It was really fun. And then, then that's pretty much when COVID started, end of 2020, early 2020, end of 2019. So yeah, that's kind of a run up to now.
Awesome. You mentioned your competition experience in Sweden. A question I asked Andrew, who was on last week, who's also had his couple of international competition experiences, is did you notice any major differences between the international stage and the kind of domestic stage? And I suppose it kind of, it can tie back into the psychology of lifting a lot as well. Like, did it affect you knowing there was maybe a little bit more on the line, a little bit more pressure on you to perform, given that you're wearing the Era singlet?
I suppose on the day I didn't really feel that much pressure to perform. Because I mean, the Irish team were just really nice and supportive. It was like we just went on a holiday basically for a week. But yeah, like in the run up to the comp, like you don't know what to expect. A lot of people that I went over with have been international comps before, so they were kind of telling me different things. There's no music. Well, there is music, but it's very, very quiet. You don't hear it. So basically, you walk out into a big arena. You don't see anyone because all the seats are like staggered up at the back, so you don't actually see anyone. It's very like an open space. There's no music, so it is kind of. I'd say Irish competitions are more enjoyable, because of the hype, basically, and that's kind of what I like in a competition. I like people roaring at me. So yeah, like you don't even hear people shouting at you. In international comps. So yeah, like definitely you kind of have to have your own internal focus going into an international comp than you do here.
Did you find the running to be different at all? A lot of people talk about, myself included, the different timings, the kind of more strict and severe timings that are in place at international comps. Did you as an athlete feel that anymore, or did you kind of just put your headphones on and lift when you were told to lift?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't notice it like that much difference. I think at that point I had only done 3 comps, and I think my third comp before that was like 10 weeks beforehand. So like I wasn't that kind of familiar with how comps ran anyway. Like honestly, I just kind of go in with my headphones on and I get told what to do. But yeah, like it was really well run in that sense. Like it was very quick. I found the day was a lot shorter than Irish comps.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Connor, you mentioned at the start you wanted to speak about the coaching other coaches thing, and it'll hold me back from saying the word coaches 25 times. So why don't you take the lead on this one, Colin?
Yeah, so Catriona, you and I have spoken in the past, but I've worked with you in terms of nutrition in the past, and for some reason I had it in my mind as I've said previously that working with somebody who is a coach themselves should be way easier. Like they know what the crack is. There's not as much of a knowledge gap to be filled, and so you can work together and really develop this good relationship straight away and just get after it. But as you two can probably bond on how difficult I am to work with as a client, regardless of me being a coach. But I'd say nutrition it's even more relevant, because it's really not about the knowledge gap, as we say, and it really is. I don't want to say such an emotional thing, but even though you might be working with a coach, it's all the same. You need to guide someone, you need to help them, you need to structure things for them and with them and motivate them. Can you speak to that as a nutrition coach? I'm sure you would know as well as being a powerlifter the balance of working with a coach. Do you find it different between the two disciplines?
Like honestly, like I didn't find much of a difference coaching a coach. I suppose like in general, like people eat every day. Obviously, like people know enough about nutrition. So kind of people coming to a nutrition coach to be told like why we should eat certain things, like that's not really a thing. So definitely like behavioral implementation is, I feel, a lot more kind of relevant in nutrition coaching. Like, but then again, I don't coach powerlifting at all, so I wouldn't know. Um, but yeah, like in terms of coaching a coach and then coaching a non-coach, I actually find no difference at all. It's just kind of up to whether the client wants to be involved in the process, because some people don't. Like some people just want to be told what to do and then they go off and do it really well. And other people want to know why they're doing things and they want to kind of know how that's going to benefit them and different ways that they can do the same thing. So it really is up to the individual, and especially the personality. Like some of my clients, I get on really well as a friend because our personalities just work really well together. And other clients, I talk to them once a week for check-in, if even. So it does depend, kind of in that sense.
Do you think this is something that I think about a lot? Do you think there's kind of it will have an effect on long-term success, being more or less process focused? Like you mentioned, there are certain individuals who just don't really want to be involved in the process. They do want to be told what to do week in, week out, and they go off and do it. And as you mentioned, you might not talk to them for a few weeks. Do you think, or have you experienced any differences in success rate? I use that term very loosely, between someone who might be more process focused and someone who might be less process focused.
Like honestly, I don't have a huge amount of experience coaching. Like I've only been coaching for 6 months, but as far as I know, not really. I suppose in training it might be different because the more kind of involved you are in the process, the more kind of you want to train and the more enjoyable it is. And if you enjoy training, then it's probably going to go better than if you don't. And more or less the same with nutrition. Like if you kind of want to succeed in this sense, then you're more likely to actually take things on board and listen to criticism, and not criticism, but take different things on and kind of approach it with more of an open mind.
So something that's a huge consideration with us, in coaching powerlifting, is, as we mentioned before we started, the psychology behind training, the different aspects, different personality traits and psychological traits that each individual will bring with them into the coach athlete relationship, and how that'll affect the strategies we look to implement with their training. In my experience, it's been huge. Those are the main considerations to be made, and ultimately, as I mentioned, I think it was in the last podcast or maybe the one before, they are ultimately the complexities that dictate the training structure. So like we can have vastly different training structures between two individuals who on the outside might look very similar, or could be lifting the same weights and whatnot. Is that very similar in nutrition coaching? Do you kind of start with the individual and run them through a screening process and build the plan from there? Or does the individual kind of run a predetermined plan? How does that work?
So usually what I do is the first week of coaching, they'll just be tracking what they eat anyway. And then second week we build on from there, because like I thought, like, so when some people start with me, they're like, "Oh, what macros should I start on this week?" It's like, I don't know. I don't know what macros suit you. I don't know what you enjoy eating. So kind of just giving people like predetermined macros or calories just is useless. It's not going to work. Um, so yeah, I usually put them through. So some of my clients, they do macro tracking, and some of them do a food log because they don't track macros. So either way, I just kind of look at what they're eating over the course of the week, and basically just, lowest hanging fruit, pick what's easiest to change, and kind of start small from there. And like obviously there's optimal kind of, say, like for example protein, there's optimal protein intake, but what's optimal isn't always realistic, and someone might not, like, might never hit that like optimal point because it's just not realistic for them, and there's no need to like force them into this little box that they're not going to fit into, because it's not enjoyable for anyone.
Something Connor said to me during the week, one of his many quotes, some of which I hate, was an imperfect plan executed perfectly is far better than the perfect plan not executed at all. I think that's
absolutely true.
it's very relevant there. It's the one quote he's ever said to me that I actually liked.
There's a lot. How dare you?
Can you speak a little bit more, Catriona, on kind of the psychology? Is there any particular like traits that you observe in the individuals that you work with that kind of I suppose have an effect on their readiness to undertake something like nutrition coaching? Have you observed anything that has been kind of a major consideration in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I find some people can be very set in their ways. Like, as I said, like people eat, 4 or 5 times a day, and they've been doing that since they were born. If you're like brought up in a certain way, you're probably not going to want to change it, and it's going to be a little bit harder. But yeah, like, I mean, there's so many different reasons why we eat. Like there's the developmental model, so that's kind of you're modeling your parents and your peers, and like your environment, your environmental factors, or psychological factors and biological factors, so hunger cues. And like, so mostly kind of what I see in coaching is people will come to me on very low calories because that's what they think they need to eat, and just because their body weight stays more or less the same, that's their maintenance calories, or so they think. And it can be kind of difficult to almost convince them to increase their calories because they're just so used to eating low calories, and they eat the same things every day and they don't want to change it. So that can be kind of a challenge. But then again, just education is important there. Explain to them, like, it's important to fuel yourself for your training. It's important to fuel yourself. Like, if you're eating low calories for a long period of time, like your bone health starts to suffer. You might lose some muscle, and your appetite signaling is off. There's lots of different things that go into it. So I think education there is really important initially. And then just kind of seeing, like what behaviors are they currently doing and how can we kind of nudge those in the right direction.
It sounds like with nutrition coaching, people are much less likely to be too happy about coming out of their comfort zone. With training, I suppose it's not an inherent thing that everyone does the whole time. So if you tell somebody training wise to do this instead of this, they might be a little bit like, cool, yeah, sure. But as you say, like most people would eat every day for their entire lives. So they really might be set in their ways and in this bubble that they have, their comfort zone. And when you start to kind of nudge them out of it, I'd say you would have a much fiercer reaction than somebody may have when you're trying to get them to change their training ways. Does that sound?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I try to do things very slowly. Like, say for an example, like reverse dieting isn't necessarily all, but I tend to do a lot of reverse dieting with people just so that they can like psychologically get used to higher calories and seeing a higher body weight and stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It sounds like to me, what you're saying in all of this is there's far more to nutrition coaching than sending someone a spreadsheet and telling them to input their macros week to week.
Absolutely.
Which I think anyone who coaches anything to with a focus on the individual would already have guessed that, right? So I suppose coaching in any regard is far more nuanced than just sending a spreadsheet. Does it annoy you to see people marketing all the same results, or the same results that I suppose you would look to provide with while they just send on a spreadsheet. Is that something that gets on your nerves? Is that something you think about?
Yeah,
Is
I mean,
that something that
absolutely. Like,
that affects how you provide your service?
yeah, I suppose like with nutrition as well, and especially coming from like a degree in nutrition, I'd view it as a health science, and like my clients' health is absolute priority. So seeing people like, those really like 4 week, 6 week fat loss things that they just, give out, you're putting people's health at risk. Their short term and their long term health, especially like, their mental health and their overall quality of life could be severely affected. So that does really irritate me, you know.
The fitness community and social media has, like, I think, so much to answer for. I think in the last 5 years, society has adapted to this kind of this idealistic fitness look, that in no way represents what a healthy human being should look like, or feel like, or act like, you know. um like the amount of things you just see on Instagram while you're scrolling through your Discover page is so disheartening. Like, I've seen so
Absolutely, yeah.
many like botched. I've heard some horror stories of like botched ketogenic diets and things like that, where people don't even know what the ketogenic diet actually is, or the history behind it, or why it works, or how it works, and they just have people running like ridiculously high protein, ridiculously high fat, no carbs, which, as you know, is not the ketogenic diet. It is quite, like, especially if you're dealing with kind of a high risk individual, you know, someone who's like at high risk of, like heart complications, or something like that. That is not that's
Yeah.
not okay.
Yeah,
That's
like people forget that like you could actually die. Like, that's a thing that can happen. Like you can go into ketoacidosis and literally die. So yeah, like that is just not taken into account at all. That's ridiculous.
even before ketoacidosis, like, you have to be in ketogenesis to be there, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you're on extremely high protein and extremely high fat, you're not in ketogenesis right there.
it's ridiculous.
Gluconeogenesis will take over, and you might as well have just been eating a lot of carbs. Am I correct in saying that, or have I just botched that entirely?
No, you absolutely have. Yeah, and then like ketone supplements are like a thing now apparently. Which makes no sense. Like, why are you taking ketones if you're meant to produce ketones to help you lose fat? It's just completely twisted, and people buy into it.
Mhm. I think what it is it's like people want that, like, thing. They want that quick fix. That's why what I refer to as race to the bottom marketing is so rife within these communities and sub communities of fitness. Is because they're preying on people's natural desire to pop a pill and have it work itself out, when in
This
reality.
desire for certainty, you might say, that just doesn't exist, and they provide these scapegoats or these things to blame, that, yeah, no, if you take this, don't worry about it, and that's all we want to hear, in any regard. But like, we talk about this frequently, Adam, about this race to the bottom marketing for fitness, and yeah, it's annoying, but at the end of the day, look, anything is better than nothing. But with nutrition, like that, it is, as you say, Catriona, it can kill you.
Mhm.
There's no fucking around with that. With training, it's like, well, that's annoying. With nutrition, you're like, this is completely reckless. So I'd
Yeah,
say it takes on this whole other level of animosity.
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
um I suppose, as we said at the start, Katrina, you've been putting out really good, valuable content in the last few months. Um, do you find there's a bit of a balancing act between making your content, which is all on Instagram, right? It's all Instagram kind
Yeah.
of infographics. Do you find it tough to balance making it accessible, and making it accurate? And kind of a two-pronged question. You mentioned in your coaching process, education is a large part of that process. How do you how do you educate? What's your process there? How do you present this information in an accessible but also accurate manner?
Yeah, so like in terms of Instagram posts, like no one goes on Instagram to read a research paper. Like I don't go on Instagram to read research
I do.
papers at all. um, so yeah, kind of making it accessible and like in the language that like your target audience is going to read. Like so for me, like my target audience would be mainly young females who are just coming into powerlifting. So when I make a post, I'm thinking like back of myself when I was like 15 or 16. Like what kind of information would be useful for me? How might I put that across in the best way? But also kind of keeping it as accurate as possible and not kind of being too vague, because like being too vague as well can be dangerous because people can just take it up the wrong way. So yeah, and then in terms of kind of educating my clients, I do I do use Instagram posts. I do send them on, like here's something that I posted on it earlier, and then they can kind of look at the references or maybe go and kind of have used that as kind of a bouncing board for their own research. And then yeah, just like in general, like in their coaching folder, I have a resources section, and I put in all kind of either my own words in explaining it or links to other things. And I use voice notes a lot as well. My clients probably hate me, but I do always just send people voice notes explaining things in a lot more detail probably than they want to hear. But yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Awesome, really cool. It's cool to build up that bank of I suppose your own resources, like that Instagram post you made a year ago, for example, you could pull up and send to someone who might need it. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Something, Catriona, you wanted to talk about was identity within sport. You kind of gave us a cool backstory there at the start. If you wanted to go through that again, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, so it kind of relates to eating behaviors. Like I was talking to an athlete earlier in the week, and they were saying that like when they started lifting, like they were sub juniors, so when they started lifting, they were a certain weight, and as a child or teenager grows, they put on weight. That's just normal. But then as well, the stimulus of training, you're going to put on more muscle, and kind of whether that's subconscious or conscious, they might restrict their eating to try and like fit into this weight class that they started competing at, because they just identify so much with it. And I think like identity is cool. Like people, like we're powerlifters. Like we identify with our sport, we identify with our weight class. But then when it comes to stuff like eating behaviors or like restricting your eating to try and fit into this weight class, that can just like cause disordered eating and then cause clinical eating disorders. And especially within weight class sports, like people who compete in weight class sports are at a higher risk of disordered eating than people who aren't. I hope I get this statistic right, but I think eating disorders, the prevalence of eating disorders in general population is I think 2 to 4%, but then when you go into athletes, is up to 40%.
Wow.
So competing in a sport does put you at a huge risk of disordered eating, and if that's kind of not nipped in the bud, if we don't see that as a coach and we just like let it grow, that could be really, really dangerous.
Something, sorry to butt in, but something you put, I think it was on your Instagram story a few weeks ago. I'm not sure what it was from, but it touched on this subject, and it kind of said that a lot of the traits that are recognized in individuals with disordered eating are recognized in elite level athletes, and a lot of high level coaches are looking for these specific problematic traits. That blew my mind. Like it made sense, but that's nuts,
Yeah, like when you put it like that, that's actually from one of the nutrition society's books, I think Sport and Exercise Nutrition. They have a whole chapter on eating disorders in athletes. So that was from that. Yeah, like I mean, eating disorders are competitive illnesses. Like look at social media. If anyone has been on Tumblr in 2015, they'd know as well. It's like I think TikTok now is becoming like really bad for just like promoting disordered behaviors. I'm not on TikTok, thankfully, but yeah, no, it is. It's really terrible, and unless you actually know and kind of see what that is, then you can't really stop it.
Are there things
what are
that
some
you?
of?
I think we have the exact same question. Is it? What are the things that you would maybe not look out for? What are like early signs and symptoms of disordered eating? Was that what you were going to say?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like obviously like weight loss and stuff you'd think would be a symptom of disordered eating, but that's kind of the end stages. So initially you'd kind of look at how their attitudes and their beliefs are about food and about how kind of they relate to food and how they relate to their own body. Like look at their body image, not even look at their body image, like have these conversations with people. Like so like body image would be one, like self-weighing as well, and like constant body monitoring. it can be a really useful behavior for some people, but in other people it can be a really negative behavior. It just kind of depends how you perceive it, and then that goes back again, like how do people perceive these different things. And like just really rigid sticking to like diet protocols is one. Like if I had a client who like stuck to their calories and macros like exactly the same thing every single day, I'd have a conversation with them about like possible, disordered thoughts around food. They'd kind of be the main ones. Mostly like it's kind of difficult to see in some people if you don't have those conversations. And if you kind of create an environment where people feel comfortable telling you these things, it's a lot easier to pick up than if they're afraid to tell you or if they think that they're doing the wrong thing.
I think what you said is really important regarding individuals who like stick to exactly what you prescribe, requiring a conversation. I think there's parallels there between training as well. Or I suppose a lot, maybe the individual who would stick exactly to their macros, like you said, might be an individual who sticks exactly to like training word for word as it's written down with absolutely no willingness to change. And when something does change or not go their way, these disordered behaviors can kind of cross over. But I think for anyone listening, that is a really important thing to hear, that even though you would think you're taking on nutrition coaching, you'd think like sticking to the macros is like what you're signing up to do. That's your job here. Not necessarily. It's far more nuanced, far more complicated than that.
Yeah, like we coach humans, we don't coach robots. If someone stuck to their macros exactly, I'd be worried.
Exactly. Something we have written down here in our talking points is just nuances of coaching, and we've already kind of touched on it just there, but I'd like to talk about some of the nuances that you think are misrepresented or not often talked about in nutrition coaching, and I'd like to try and kind of draw parallels between nutrition coaching and powerlifting coaching. What do you think?
Yeah, so I suppose like coaching isn't just relaying information. Like you can go on and do Google search and get all the information you need for free. Like a lot of it is down to kind of support and also, like having someone to bounce ideas off, and just kind of basically, like you said, having someone to hold your hands through the process is needed. We're all humans, like. So yeah, kind of in that sense, then I actually had a conversation with a city gym coach there last week, and we're talking about like, like feeling like we need to know things and feeling like we need to know everything, which like isn't the case at all. Like I mean, I don't know everything about nutrition. There's lots that I, have no idea about, but kind of acting as that mediator between like the research and the misconceptions and all the information that might be difficult to understand, and being able to kind of provide it in a more accessible and easily understandable way to the client, and also making it more applicable, like kind of individualizing it, I suppose, to what the client needs.
I think one of the bravest things a coach in any discipline can say is, "I don't know." If there's a piece of advice I can give to, or I could have given to myself as a coach when I started out coaching 5 or 6 years ago, it would be, don't be afraid to say I don't know. First of all, you're inexperienced, you're young. Of course you don't know. Of course you don't know everything. So don't be afraid to say I don't know.
What I loved just there when we were talking was you said it's a conversation, and that it's, when we were talking about recognizing maybe signs and symptoms of disordered eating, you were heavy on that conversation side of things and working with the person. It wasn't just tracking the, what we call hard data points, like the macro sheets, the numbers, all that kind of thing. It is a nice balance between the two. I think that is super important, and it seems to be even more so with nutrition coaching, because it is so based around the individual, and these are very complicated and nuanced things. So I love that the conversation and knowing the person is emphasized.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I find people have such a moral value attached to food, and you can't see that through a tracking sheet. So those conversations are absolutely crucial.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. It sounds to me like, if I had to describe your coaching approach, it would be a bottoms up approach, which is exactly what we do.
I wasn't going to go there, but
I mean,
but you did.
it is, right? Like, you don't, if a client came to you with, like, let's say this goal, they came to you saying, like, in 16 weeks I want to do this. What's your first thought? Do you is your first thought like, okay, well, my job here is to hit this goal, or do you kind of put that goal, regardless of how reasonable or probably unreasonable it is, on the back burner and look at the individual in front of you?
Yeah, like absolutely. It depends what the goal is. If it's, if someone comes to me 2 weeks out from a comp and they want to cut like a huge amount of weight, that's not going to happen. And I'm not going to put someone's health at risk for, a goal like that. I mean, some coaches will, and like I'd probably, if someone came to me with a goal that I just didn't feel like I was able to help them achieve, I'd refer them to someone who I knew would be more experienced. But yeah, like I'm kind of glad that I started coaching during the pandemic, because there's no comps and there's no kind of timeline for anything. So if someone comes to me, say like a lot of girls come to me wanting to lose fat, and they'd be on really low calories, and I kind of have a plan. Honestly, like the majority of my clients have been like that, so I already have kind of a plan in place in my head, kind of what way we're going to approach this, and I would communicate to them. Like I wouldn't do things without them realizing, or I wouldn't tell them that like, oh yeah, like 16 weeks you can do X, Y, Z, but like have this other kind of agenda. I communicate that with them. And yeah, we kind of see where they are. Like most people, when they come to me with a certain goal, I'd ask them, why do they want that? Is that the actual goal that you want, or is that a goal that you just think I want to hear?
A conversation, right?
A conversation, exactly. Like people kind of underestimate the power of that.
Big time.
Yeah, and just like asking why, like just getting really to the bottom of things. Like, why do they want to do that goal? What do they think that's going to help them achieve? Is it got to do with like their body image? Has it got to do with performance? And then kind of knowing that, we can plan an approach.
It may not even be a question that they've asked themselves. Am I right? Like if you ask them, well, why do you want to do this? I'm sure it's often the case where they're like, I actually don't know. And it's funny. I'm thinking to myself when you said about identities in sport, and especially in regards to weight classes. I remember when I first tried to move up to the 93s, I wasn't a big 83 whatsoever. I wasn't a strong 83 either. But I had this idea of being over 200 pounds in my head in terms of body weight. And for some reason, we could probably get into, well, let's not do that right now, that I just wanted to be above that mark. I wanted to say, yep, 200 pounds, certified big lad. There we go. So I think it is hugely prevalent. And if we even just scratch below the surface a little bit, we'll find it, even if I may not have recognized it myself at the time. If you had asked, we probably would have found out pretty quickly. So I think it's interesting that this is so prevalent,
Yeah. Yeah, like you can have this kind of idea in your head and just keep going, working towards it. But unless you actually stop and ask yourself, like what is this actually doing for me?
It's such a cool evolution of coaching, I suppose, in general. Like, this style of coaching has obviously been around for a long time, but it's starting to become more and more prevalent to the point where now you have kind of smaller, less known coaches like ourselves running this very individual focused approach. As we say, bottoms up rather than top down. We're looking at the individual in front of us and we're having conversations. You hear the term data thrown around so much, and to me, when I speak about data, if I was having a coach to coach interaction about an individual, most of the data that we collect comes from conversations, not a spreadsheet. So really, conversations are the most undervalued source of data you could collect on an individual. It's just really, it's cool and inspiring to hear that this is your approach, because a lot of people, myself included until recently, would have thought nutrition coaching equals macro tracking, plus minus whatever calories you need to achieve your goal. But there's a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like some of my clients don't even track macros and they make really good progress.
Tell us a little bit about that. How do you handle that? Is it just, would you have them remove X food that seems like that would equal the amount of calories if their goal is weight loss? How does that work?
Like more or less. So I do food logs, so they either write down what time they eat and what it is they eat, or they'll take photos and send it to me. And then that's basically it. Like, we work with portion sizes. So like say a PAM, a protein food would be a portion of protein, like 20 grams. Kind of having balanced meals, like a portion of protein, some carbs and some vegetables, eating, like proper meal timing and stuff would come into that as well. And like obviously it does matter kind of your total daily energy intake, but looking at the individual kind of meals as well be really important for people who track macros as well. Like meal timing around exercise and distributing protein and stuff is something that a lot of people don't actually think about. They just think about the the total at the end of the day. But also like some of my clients, like I had one girl who came to me who actually just wanted to improve her relationship with food. She wanted to stop overeating, so we looked at kind of tracked her food intake for a little while. We started looking at, say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how hungry are you before a meal, how hungry are you after, and what are your feelings around these meals? Like, are you feeling stressed, or afterwards, do you feel uncomfortably full? What can we do to kind of change these things around and make eating just more enjoyable for you?
How difficult is it for you to get, I suppose, to the core of a person, to get these kind of very personal and intimate details out of them? I imagine like getting true honesty out of someone who's dealing with an issue like this might be difficult. Is it just kind of slowly building the relationship, or do you kind of have processes around that?
Yeah, it is just building up relationship, like building up trust, and kind of just checking in with them. I find like people, just sending like checking in with them during the week, asking them how are they actually feeling, and kind of creating that kind of environment where they feel like they can actually tell me how they're really feeling and not just what they want me to hear. Is really important. I try, especially on Instagram, like I try to be as I hate the word transparent. I find everyone's like, oh, I'm being transparent, but I do try to be as open as possible, and kind of show, like I'm human as well. I don't eat perfectly. I hate vegetables. I'm not a perfect person. Um, like just, and I find people realize after a little while that the more open they are with me, the more progress we can make. Because if they're closed off and if they don't tell me everything, we're not going to make as much progress as we can. And it kind of takes a little while for people to realize that, but once they do, it's great.
I love that. And as well, if they see you as a human being who goes through the same struggles, they'll be much more inclined to kind of lower their shield. Like it's often said, and Adam, I'm sure you'll feel the same, that if somebody goes into a gym, they see this personal trainer as he's achieved this thing. Like he doesn't know what my struggles are, like the lay people. But if you kind of relate to them a little bit more, you say, I don't feel like training either. Or if you were to say something like along nutrition, like I just don't really feel like getting this last bit of protein in for the day, or to do this or to do this. You're able to see eye to eye this person a little bit more, and I'd imagine that allows them to open up that little bit more as well. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like once they kind of realize that they're not going to be judged, but like people come into nutrition coaching especially feeling like they're going to be judged for what they eat, and that I'm going to give out to them for not doing certain things. But like that's just not how it works at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. It kind of relates back to the social media aspect of it. How do you, what do you actively think about, I suppose, pre-educating people as to what your service actually entails, rather than having people come to you with kind of these preconceived, I suppose, misconceptions about what it actually is? Is that a consideration you make in your social media postings, or
Yeah,
is that why
absolutely.
you do what you do on social media?
Initially, when I started making posts, it was more for my own education. I was kind of doing a mentorship thing with Gary Ben at the time, and he mentions that, like, for people to start to see you as a coach, you need to start presenting yourself as a coach. So kind of in part, I was more just trying to put together just resources for myself and for people as well, on specific things. Like some of my really earlier posts are just really long and really like concise, or I suppose. So it's kind of having those there is great, and also I find like you can kind of put across your message a bit more. Like I like to think that through my coaching, I'm going to help people have more of a better relationship with themselves, I suppose, while still achieving their athletic goals. Like you don't need to sacrifice your happiness, for the weight on the bar. So I try my best to put that across on Instagram. I don't know how successful I are, but yeah, kind of that's my aim, I suppose.
It's funny you said people don't need to sacrifice their happiness for weight on the bar. Huge parallel again there. I think it's one of these stupid tropes that, like, you know, if you want this, you gotta be willing to do the work and sacrifice every relationship in your life, and, you know, never not be in the gym and don't eat anything nice or ever drink alcohol. Oh, it's one of those really frustrating things that, like, a very surprising amount of people still buy into, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, if you're miserable and like, you know, you end up hating training, then you're probably not going to do as well as you wanted to.
Fact. So maybe if you hate doing your eighth back down on a set, maybe don't do 8 sets of 5, you know?
Yeah,
Maybe try doing less. You
take a
know?
different approach, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And I think if you're an athlete and that this is a predicament you're in, you know, with a coach, I think it's very important to explore the wider market, because now it's not like 10 years ago where you know, the I suppose the kind of market consensus was, here's a 16-week program, let me know how you get on with it, you know. Now there are resources like people like us who look at coaching and the coach athlete relationship and process as a conversation, you know. And I think it's really important if you are an athlete and you find yourself, because it's also all too common in powerlifting specifically, it seems, where someone will get really into it and really invested in it and love it and live it for the first year, 2 years, but then meet a road bump, or just start hating what they're doing because they've done it, you know, this might be their 8th time doing it and the novelty is gone. You know, if your coach isn't looking to work through these issues with you, if they're saying, let me know how you get on, maybe think about looking for someone who's there to help you, who's there to hold your hand. There's nothing wrong with it, you know.
Somebody to work with you, not just prescribe plans.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
yeah, it's like the whole idea of motivational interviewing. You're working with the person to achieve the same goal, you know?
Yeah.
Like my clients' goals are my goals, and I'm sure the same with you guys. Like,
Yep.
Have
Absolutely.
you read much on motivational interviewing? I know we talked earlier on about different electives that are in your degree, and how they can, I'm not sure the exact word, but the psychology behind the thing, and enacting behavioral change. I'm sure having a good skill or a good grasp of motivational interviewing can really aid you in working with clients, especially in nutrition. So have you read much on that?
I haven't read a huge amount. I mean, I read one book cover to cover, and that's probably the extent. I think, like with motivational interviewing, and most of it is just like applying it and like just practicing it, because it is more like how you speak to people and how you like how you have these conversations, and you can't like get better at having those conversations by reading about it. Um,
Mhm.
but, like, yeah, you can read like all you want about a certain thing, but unless you actually put it into practice, you're not going to get any better.
If
Um,
just for anyone who's listening, how what is motivational interviewing? How would you describe it? How would you sum it up?
That is a good question. I don't actually. So motivation interviewing basically is like working with the person, knowing what kind of why they want a certain thing, kind of having those conversations around things like we said earlier, like why, like what is your goal? Why do you want to do that goal? And having them kind of, it's basically like a person knows what they want already. It's kind of pulling that out of them, pulling that
Right.
change basically out of them.
Would I be right in saying that it's a lot of it is devising certain, typically open-ended questions to pull that the core of what they're talking about out of them?
Yeah, basically, yeah, just having those open-ended questions. Because you know, like someone comes to me for kind of nutrition coaching, like they have a certain goal in mind, and you know they want. Like it really annoys me when people say that they just don't want it enough. You know, like people do want the thing. If they want to pay me for coaching, they want the thing. But kind of pulling that out of them and pulling that, you know, change out of them does happen through those conversations.
is there anything, obviously you compete in powerlifting, and I assume a lot of the majority of your clientele are powerlifters. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Do you work with people who aren't powerlifters?
Yep.
You do.
Yeah, a couple of times.
Is there any major observable differences between working with these two different populations?
I find powerlifters are very attached to their body weight. Especially like, you know, even in off season, like now there's no comps really lined up and people are still like, oh my god, like I'm, you know, not in my weight class, like that's not really that important. Whereas like Gen Pop, like one of my clients actually doesn't weigh herself at all. Like her body weight is just not an issue at all, whereas powerlifters will be very kind of attached to the number on the scale. And I have a client at the minute who she stopped weighing herself for a little while just because it wasn't realistic for her. She moved and she didn't have a scales, and she found that that was actually impacting her kind of feelings about herself. Kind of like, you know, say standing on a scale in the morning and seeing whatever number was there, that impacted her mood, and you know, if it was within a certain kind of range, it made her happy, and then when she wasn't able to, she couldn't know whether she was in that range or not. She just felt very out of control. So I suppose powerlifters are quite competitive in more ways than just powerlifting. They do like to have kind of that rigid and like stay within your weight class, eat, hit your macros, do all your training kind of thing, whereas Gen Pop can be a bit more lenient.
Powerlifting is a weird sport. Like powerlifting it's we've got these. It's an amateur sport, right? Pretty much across the board, and you see these amateurs who aren't, you know, hyper competitive, living, training like elite athletes. Like in other sports, like, you know, if you're playing football or soccer, like I feel like powerlifting has a disproportionate amount of people who really take their training ridiculously seriously, you know, and train for like 15 hours a week, and you know, all of their entire lifestyle is formed around powerlifting. It's really weird.
Yeah.
I can't think of like I cannot think well, I haven't been exposed to another sport where that's the case. You know, if you're on like a football team, that you know, what is it, J1, is that a thing? I don't know.
No
I
idea.
don't play
That's
football.
a trip to America, Adam.
That is
I would not have known.
if you're on a junior or a senior football team, like I'm pretty sure the majority of them aren't training 10 plus hours a week and structuring their entire lifestyle around the sport. It's that's an observation I've made. It's strange.
It is
Yeah,
pretty
like
crazy now,
you see,
actually.
like, sorry.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, you see like people who haven't even stepped foot on a platform before, like already trying to cut weight into, you know, a weight class that they just don't fit into because they compare their numbers with other people's numbers, and you know, this is where they should be because they might win something. Like, why are you doing that?
I know that one well. This is why Connor's cutting to the 74s.
Yeah, get that
at the
deadlift record. This is not related really to powerlifting, but it's something that just kind of struck me when we were talking about the utility of a weighing scales and how it's, you know, it's appropriate for some people and it's not appropriate for others. There seems to have been this real back and forth over the last few years of metrics for health, especially when it comes to nutrition and body weight. There was a time, and I still see people saying it, that the weighing scales is the worst metric for health, like completely. And then of course we saw it as well with BMI, that BMI is fucking ridiculous. Like, I don't know why it was ever made in these things. And then now people are kind of slowly trudging back to them. You're like, you know, actually they're grand, they're for this and for that. What do you make of that? Have you seen much of that in terms of the academic side of nutrition, where have people kind of to and fro between different metrics for health in terms of weight management?
Yeah, I mean, like BMI is like, it's, if people use BMI for their own kind of personal use, it's not the best because it doesn't take into account like your body composition. It's basically, I think it's just your weight in kilos divided by, you know, your height in meters squared. Like, what does that tell you? Nothing. But like in clinical settings, like it can be pretty useful, especially like in research as well. It's basically just like, grouping people into different categories and kind of looking at trends over time, I suppose. but in coaching, like I wouldn't use BMI at all because it's just not useful. And then in terms of like scales and stuff, like it's not always the behavior that's bad, it's like more how you perceive it. So what might be really good for one person might be really harmful to another. So like a lot of my clients would use weighing scales and they just find it fine, and they can detach themselves from their weight pretty handily. Other people might stop on the scales and it like could determine their mood for the rest of the day, and it might just be really harmful long term. So I suppose in a coaching situation, knowing kind of how they feel about certain things and knowing kind of what might be more harmful than it's worth is kind of important. And then again, those conversations you need to have with people, like how do they feel about certain things.
For sure. I'm sure it's context dependent, right? Like it's
100%.
a tool, it's not good or it's bad. And I suppose, as you say, in the context of one-on-one really individualized coaching, maybe BMI is not the most helpful, especially when you're dealing with an athletic population like powerlifters. Like maybe if in research you're dealing with a very large cohort of people and you're trying to separate out risk factors, something like BMI may be a little bit more applicable, especially in general population. But these things, they have context, they have their use. They're not good, bad, or indifferent. And I suppose that's built into a bottoms up or an individualized nutrition plan. Like there's nuance, there's complexities. Chill out. You know, that kind of way.
I mean, it's just a tool. Like you can use it or you don't have to. If you don't want to, it's fine.
Like so many things, again, parallels back to powerlifting. Like, you know, what's like a tendo unit? Is that what's, no, that's the electricity thing. The bar speed measurement tool, or RPE by video, or RPE by feel, or percentages. These are all tools. Some of them become trendy, like Connor mentioned, you know, like one year this is the best thing and the next year this is the best thing, forget that last thing. But they're all tools, and it is context dependent.
I just want to add in super quickly, mixing up a tendo unit and a velocity tracker would be a fatal miscalculation. I'm just going for my single 8.
Fact.
So like that felt tough. Like you just shocked yourself.
Catriona, one more thing I wanted to talk about before we start to finish up is I suppose your route into nutrition coaching. Obviously, you're a nutrition student, and you mentioned that you've worked with Gareth Ben. The reason I ask is, like, powerlifting coaching is a very weird kind of gray area where if you want to start, you kind of just have to start and hopefully be around the right group of people and be in the right place at the right time, and have the right access to the right information that allows you to become the best, you know, coach you can be. I think with nutrition coaching, there's a far more, you know, systematic way in. Could you just speak to I suppose how you started, and how it, to any, you know, prospective nutrition coaches listening, how they would go about it?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, it's pretty similar to powerlifting coaching. Like you don't have to have any like certification behind you. It does help. Obviously, like having that kind of base knowledge really helps. Like I did go. I did decide to do a degree, because you know I don't know if I want to do coaching for the rest of my life. There's so much more to nutrition than just coaching, and then kind of so the degree helps. But if you specifically want to go into coaching, like you know, like certification, like precision nutrition, or something along the lines of that, is usually like a really good kind of base, I suppose, to start off with. But yeah, like I mean, the term nutritionist like isn't protected by law or anything, whereas a dietitian would be. So like to be a dietitian, you have to have a dietetic degree, whereas to call yourself a nutritionist, you don't need to have a nutrition degree. You know, which is problematic. But yeah, it's like pretty similar. Just as long kind of as you are surrounded by the right people, you can, you know, shadow different people and have some really good mentors.
I guess you mentioned precision nutrition, and I would agree it's a fantastic resource. Is there any other resources that you would, you know, send
I
people
think
towards?
MNU is a very good course as well. No, EIQ Nutrition is another one. I think that's a new one. Amelia Thompson is doing that.
MNU is very similar to precision, right? It's kind of,
as far as I know, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool. Awesome. Connor, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we did well there on covering all bases. Actually one thing that comes to mind, there when we're talking about the route into coaching and being new to it and surrounding yourself with the right people is kind of the plague that is imposter syndrome and worrying about the information that you're putting out and if it's your place and if it's this, if it's that. I think the one thing to consider is that there's always going to be somebody who's totally unqualified doing it anyway. Now it's generally totally wrong and bad, but if you're confident, especially if your information is evidence based, that if you're putting out the right shit, fucking go for it. Like if you can do anything to contribute against the vast amount of bullshit that's on the internet, I think particularly about nutrition, it just seems to be such a gimmicky industry where people are like, no, just eat nothing but fats and you'll be fine, or time your diets with the fucking lunar cycle or whatever it is. I think if you're putting out good evidence-based information, whatever fucking degree or qualification you have, try and do something.
I think on top of that as well, Connor, you mentioned that, there's always someone underneath you doing worse. There's always going to be someone better than you as well. There's always going to be someone who knows far more than you, and might look at your content and think there's something wrong with this. That is something you need to get over as well. There's always going to be someone better than you. And that is something I can relate to. That's something that has stopped me from putting out content so much over the last number of years. That kind of almost into this podcast. That level of insecurity, that you might slip up. But as we mentioned in the last, maybe a couple of episodes ago, it's all right to make mistakes. It's all right to say you don't know. That's how the only route to betterment, the only route to become a better coach or content creator or whatever it is. So I think there's that to the imposter syndrome equation as well.
Yeah, like the first couple of things you do are always going to be pretty terrible. But just the more you do it, like the better you get.
Absolutely. As with everything. Awesome. Catriona, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you jumping on this. Where can we find you? Have you got an Instagram or a website or what's up there?
Yeah, so my Instagram is Catriona. It's not actually how you spell my name, it's phonetically. So many people have, addressed me by Catriona. But it's spelled C-A-T or EENAHH. Yes, I think that's it. I hope that's it anyway.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned on your story, have you upcoming availability for coaching, for nutrition coaching? What's the story there?
So right now it's kind of how many people can I coach alongside college. So I do, yes, but at some point I'm gonna have to put a cap on it. But yeah, at the minute I do availability.
So I suppose for updates on that, just follow your Instagram.
Yeah, I can update it pretty regularly. So do follow me on Instagram if you can.
Fantastic. All right. Excellent. Thanks again, Catriona. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. As always, any questions or concerns or comments or anything, please comment down below. We will see you again within 7 days. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All the best.